Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for coming back for our book study for chapters 2 and 3 this week. There's a lot of information going on focused on justice and love, and I think the authors did a really interesting job with some of that. So I'm curious to hear some of your responses, some of ways that you've interpreted some of that, and I appreciate anything that you guys want to share. I'm also going to bump this up so hopefully you guys can find it again because I heard of a couple people who said they weren't sure. Please feel free to comment. I encourage discussion through this. Do some videos. If you have questions that you want to direct specifically to me, you can do that as well. But here in the second chapter, they talk about when justice rolls down, and they focus on this concept of moral courage to do what is right. The authors begin, because I am an other to someone who is an other to me. We are all others to one another. If that is true, then no one is a stranger, and yet we are all strangers to one another. And it's that mentality, I feel like, that is going on in our world today. The struggles, the fear, the pain, this notion of xenophobia, where there is a fear of the other. There's a fear of an unwillingness to have conversations, specifically because of fear of how the person will react. We've seen such dramatic encounters of people reacting violently that we don't want to do that. In fact, fear can lead to hate, which can turn to violence. So I think there's so many things that are interwoven into this notion of fear, hate, violence that are going on in our world today, that it's easy to isolate, it's easy to retreat into ourselves and to not have some of these challenging discussions. But I think it's really important for us to have them. And I think especially at church, at a community, we need to have this opportunity to be able to connect with one another and to find ways to engage in faithful discussion with one another. The big question I took away from this is, can we find a way forward? And I think in order for us to do that, we have to be able to see what is going on in our world today, but also to be able to have these discussions and then find opportunities to move forward. So where does that leave us? As the author goes, they focus on the prophet Micah, which is one, I have to say, of the reasons why I really appreciate this book, is because they pull from my personal favorite passage from Micah. And they start with Micah's chapter 6 through 8. And those verses go, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" And these are all questions. These are all things that have happened in the past or that were brought up. Abraham and Isaac, people coming to the temple to offer sacrifices in ways of burnt offerings, to offer requests for forgiveness. So there's a lot of history and understanding in this. And on this slide, you can see, and you can feel free to pause it and see the different themes and various ways that the chapters of Micah go through. It's a really short book. It's prophetic work in the Old Testament. It's really short, so I encourage, if you haven't read it before, take some time and read through the whole thing if you get the opportunity, because it is really insightful, I feel. But they really focus on this verse 8, which again is my favorite passage. And it's a response to some of those questions. And it goes, "He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God." So the next three chapters, chapters 2, 3, and 4, are going to talk about these three segments in Micah, these three notions of justice, kindness, and humbleness. And they're going to tweak some of that language, which I feel is really important for us. And I think it's a way that we can have some deeper discussion on each of those. So I look forward to that discussion. And again, feel free to pause this at any time to write some notes and then to write questions and use this time to respond as well. So a closer look at 6:8. Paul Ingram does a more literal translation from Hebrew. His language is do justice, live compassionately, and world of for solidarity of community founded on compassion and justice. So I think this is really important that these three unique understandings, doing justice, living compassionately, and walking in humbleness, sort of all converge together. And I think it's vital for us to recognize that these aren't just individual pieces that, well, we're just going to focus on justice, or we're going to focus on compassionate living, or we're going to focus on walking humbly with God. They're all different layers, and they all intersect and intertwine together. So what does justice look like for you? You specifically, where have you seen justice at work in your life or in our world? Have you seen injustice? And if you've seen injustice, what would the flip side of that be? How would that have been different if justice would have taken place? And according to the Bible, how do we see God's justice? I think this is a really important question to ask, because there are lots of ways that we see and that people pull out justice. Some say Sodom and Gomorrah is God's justice. Some say when the Israelites were welcomed into the promised land. Some say when they were sent into exile. So there's lots of different ways that we see, and those are just some from the Old Testament. And then we'll talk about even some from the New Testament moving forward. So what does justice look like? There are four types that I want to focus on today. The first and foremost is restorative justice. Restorative justice is a theory of justice that emphasizes repairing the harm caused by behavior. Often it's criminal behavior. So I'm going to pose this hypothetical that we did on Sunday. There are two guys that go fishing. One is fishing to feed his family, and that's purpose. That's why he needs it. That's the only way they're going to get food. The other one just is enjoying it, does it for fun, but takes his food home. Well, the one who is fishing to feed his family catches a lot of big fish. The one who does it for fun gets jealous, and he steals the fish from the other guy and leaves. So the one who was doing it to feed his family becomes the victim, and the one who steals it is the perpetrator. How restorative justice works is that instead of sending the perpetrator to jail or to have some criminal act, criminal justice, they're brought together and with a community around them. And then the victim gets to explain just how much that act affected him. So you stole the fish that I caught, which caused my family to go hungry, which caused my child to get even more sick. You did that. Your pain, caused this. Your actions caused that. So there's this notion of the perpetrator has to be open to hearing what happened, the results of the choices that they made. The other part of that is they have to take responsibility. Yeah, I did it. I stole those fish. So that's part of restorative justice. The other part then is working towards bringing relationship, bringing community back together. So those that are gathered, not just the two of them, all of those that are there work to find a way to move forward again. So what does he have to do? Does the one who likes to fish have to go fish and catch for a week? Or, how are they going to make amends? How are they going to take responsibility and to see the consequences of their action? So that's part of it as well. And it's really interesting, and there's a lot of talk about this. And in fact, in Native American and indigenous peoples cultures, they did a lot of this. In fact, so much of their concepts for leadership and for how they lived together was based on this premise of working together to strengthen community. So that's one part of justice. Another part is mercy. God shows justice often in the form of mercy for the Israelites and others. In spite of their actions, they are welcomed into the Holy Land. Over and over again, the Israelites cry out, complain, whine, build a golden calf, don't trust God, do all of these things. And yet, in the midst of all of that, God is willing to show mercy and to bring the Israelites into the promised land. Relief for oppressed and needy. I think this is really vital for us to recognize and to acknowledge as part of our faith. God, through Jesus, seeks to offer grace and welcome to all those who are oppressed or in need. Think about this. Jesus asks for forgiveness on the cross to those who nailed him there. They don't ask for forgiveness, he offers it. He goes, and when Jesus interacts with people, it is the blind, it is the lame, it is those near death, it is those who have been cast out, those who have leprosy, those who have been thrown out of community, and he seeks to care for them. There are a lot of biblical notions about how justice is seen in that way. And finally, advocacy and resilience. You'll see the picture above that is of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a Lutheran pastor in Germany, actually came to America and during World War II and didn't think the church was doing enough. So he went back to Germany to fight and to resist against Hitler. He was arrested for trying actually to kill Hitler. And a few days before the concentration camp was raided where he was executed. So the church, as he says it, the church has an unconditional obligation to the victim of any ordering society, not just to bandage the victim under the wheel, but to put a spoke in the wheel itself. Bishop Desmond Tutu says it this way: instead of just pulling the people out of the river, we need to go up and find why they're falling in. One of the things that I raised, this question, this concept, was in the 80s. I remember in the 80s, there was this notion of the war on drugs, right? We're going to get rid of drugs, we're going to get rid of drugs, we're going to get rid of drugs. But we didn't ask what might be the more important question is, why were people using drugs? So often, drugs are used for painkillers or to escape reality. So what was it that was causing pain or that they needed to escape from that we could work on as a society to change so that they would choose not to need the drugs? They did this in around 2010 with the heroin epidemic. Heroin was a massive problem, and it still is in many ways. But one of the things they recognized was one of the reasons why heroin was becoming such a problem was that it was people were turning to it after they had gone for surgery or had a debilitating injury, that they then received a prescription for oxycodone, Oxycontin, those kinds of things. And then when they were no longer able to get those and had become addicted to them, then they had to find something else. So they turned to heroin. So what did they do? They started not using those as much. In fact, many of the drug companies have stopped using those type of drugs. So how then do we start to put that spoke into the wheel itself in order to make sure that society starts to change? These are hard, challenging questions and ideas that as the church, we often, I feel, need to struggle with more fully than we do. That's what I jumped through very, very quickly for chapter 2, because there's so much going on with all of that. I'm really curious to hear your feedback and some of the reflection questions. What are some things that can contribute to fear of others? What do you believe biblical justice consists of? Where did it originate? How can faith communities, churches, become instruments of justice? And I'd really be interested to hear your responses on some of those. Again, I will share them later in the week, but please take some time. And there are some other questions that I wrote. Is justice important to our faith? Is it vital for us to be living into our world as part of the community? Are there social responsibilities the church should hold firm in and engage in to challenge culture? And what does it mean to faithfully respond to justice in our world today? Those are some of the questions that I uplifted that I would love to hear from you more. So again, here's a great time to pause this, to reflect on it, to write some notes down, to write something, to record something, and to post it on here. And if you have any questions about how to do any of that, please feel free to reach out to me. But as we do that, we're going to jump right into chapter 3 now. So chapter 3 talks about loving one another or practicing mercy and compassion. What do we mean by love and compassion? Preaching that we are to love our neighbor, welcome the stranger, and stand up for the marginalized does not mean you are making a political statement. It means you are making a biblical statement. This chapter focuses not just on that second part of the Micah passage on living compassionately, but it also focuses on the parable of the Good Samaritan. This is a modern interpretation of what that might look like, and I thought it was really interesting to see, because you can see, the group in the background reading the Bible, the two others sort of glancing back, but just sort of ignoring everything, and it's this guy who walks up to help. I think there's so many things that we can pull from that passage and the understanding. One of the things that was raised is that this notion of Jesus calling the guy a Samaritan was really sort of, he was the other. He was the, one of those that we don't associate with. So it's really interesting to hear that concept and that shift. The other part is the lawyer's response to Jesus when Jesus asks him, so who was the neighbor? And the lawyer can't bring himself to say the Samaritan. He has to say the one who showed mercy. So I think it's really important for all of us to recognize the importance of this and what do we mean by love and compassion? And I think those are really fascinating and intrinsic points of view for our faith and our understanding as we move forward. Luther talks about this, and they pull Luther in various other times. Luther suggests that anyone who needs our mercy and compassion without judgment about whether that person deserves it and without regard for who they are is our neighbor. So basically, anybody who needs our compassion or our mercy, it is our reflection of how we show God to them. What they do with that compassion, what they do with that mercy, that reflects on them. Therefore, if Jesus suggests that our neighbor is everyone we meet, regardless of religion, class, or ethnic background, then all of God's children must also be our brothers and sisters. This is what is so radical and revolutionary about the teaching of Jesus and the Christian scripture. It tends to be all-inclusive rather than exclusive. I'm going to read that again. It tends to be all-inclusive rather than exclusive. The purpose of Jesus is to invite people into relationship. Jesus seeks to engage people and care for them and reach out and connect with them, no matter what they've done in their past. I find this really fascinating, and I know I've preached on this before, but this concept of often when people cite scripture, the scripture says this about LGBTQ+. The scripture says that about divorce. The scripture says this about doing that. The scripture says that about doing that. A lot of where they find it is the book of Leviticus, which is the Old Testament. It's a book of laws. So there's hundreds of laws in it. But more than 35 times in Leviticus does it command us to love the stranger. But we don't hear that. We don't hear people talk about that. Rather, they focus on, well, it says this and it says that. The stranger is the one we are taught to love precisely because they are not like ourselves. Think about that. We are called to love people who are not like ourselves. We are called to challenge our faith and our understanding in people by showing that love for one another and for the world around us. Oh, sorry about that. So I thought I missed one. But again, here are these reflection questions, this notion of compassion. I think is really connected. I like this symbolism where empathy and our desire of action merge together to see what compassion is all about, to see how it engages in our world today. So, how do you think Jesus tried to expand our understanding of who our neighbor is in this parable of the Good Samaritan? How does this contrast with our common understanding of most Jews in the first century? How are we challenged by people who are new or different? How are we enriched by strangers or outsiders who may become our friends? What are ways that our homes, our country, and our places of worship can be more welcoming to those who are different? These are the reflection questions that they have. One of the things that I would like to strike out is that notion of welcoming, and I would put in inviting. Here's why. Welcoming to me means we welcome you as you walk in the door. Okay? You have to show up. The person has to show up first for us to welcome them. Inviting means that we go out, we engage, we take that first step to reach out our hand so that they may come to know us rather than the other way around. That's what, in my opinion, it means to be inviting. That's what it means, in my opinion, for us to be church, to engage one another and to invite one another into challenging questions, into wonderful relationships, into ways that engage and uplift one another, and to have some of those questions and discussions. So that's where we are for our second week. I invite you again to do some of this study, to pause this wherever you need to make some notes, to share what impacted you specifically. I will hop on later this week and I will talk about these, both of the sets of reflection questions. So next week, we're going to talk about chapter 4, and then we're going to move on. I'm really excited. I hope you guys are enjoying this book. And again, if you're being challenged in any way, please feel free to share that with the group or me directly. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you soon, wherever you find us. God bless.